One thing that they used to say is Hancock can't be right because there was no global cataclysm, 12 or 13,000 years ago. Well, now we know there was, and there are various explanations for it. Right at the epicenter of this cataclysm was a civilization that we would regard as advanced, not a simple hunter-gatherer civilization.
In 1929, scholars cataloging documents inside Topkapi Palace in Istanbul uncovered a map drawn on gazelle skin, dated to 1513. The signature belonged to Piri Reis, an admiral of the Ottoman Navy. Only about 1/3 of the original map has survived, yet that remaining fragment contains something that science has struggled to explain for nearly a century. The coastline of a continent that, according to conventional history, had never been reached by humans at the time the map was created, is depicted with a level of accuracy that seems impossible for its era. After years of analysis, the mystery of how this map was created has finally been confronted with a new answer, and that answer may force a complete rethinking of how human civilization developed. The map that was not supposed to exist. Piri Reis was not an obscure figure. He was a real naval admiral who served under the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century, and the author of a renowned maritime work titled Cataloguing, an encyclopedic guide to Mediterranean navigation that still survives today. He was not an amateur mapmaker, he was a professional, with access to the Ottoman Empire's vast archive of maritime records, one of the most powerful naval powers of its time. Piri Reis himself wrote directly on the map that he compiled it from multiple sources, including charts attributed to Christopher Columbus and materials he described as older than those Columbus had used. This is not a later interpretation by researchers. These are his own words, written in 1513, on the very map now preserved in Topkapi. The standard explanation has always remained consistent. The map is considered a product of early Renaissance cartography. Piri Reis combined multiple sources, some more accurate than others, producing a map that was impressive for its time, yet still contained the typical distortions of 16th century mapping. Scale inconsistencies, coastlines stretched or compressed, regions drawn partly from speculation rather than direct observation. Nothing unusual. These are common features of maps from that era, except for several details that do not fit that explanation. The first lies in how the map positions coastlines along the east to west axis, meaning longitude. Determining longitude at sea requires precise knowledge of the time difference between the ship's location and a fixed reference point. Each degree of longitude corresponds to 4 minutes of time. To measure this reliably on a vessel traveling for weeks across the ocean, one would need a mechanical timekeeping device capable of maintaining accuracy despite fluctuations in temperature, humidity, and constant motion. That device, the marine chronometer, was not successfully developed until John Harrison completed his H4 model in 1759, more than 2 centuries after Piri Reis signed this map. The second anomaly appears along the southern edge of the chart. Running across the bottom is a continuous landmass, complete with bays, peninsulas, and irregular coastlines, according to conventional history. Antarctica was first sighted around 1818 or 1820, depending on which expedition is credited. Before that, no verified nautical charts recorded the coastline of this continent. Yet some researchers have asked a simple question. What exactly is that southern landmass on the Piri Reis map? The mainstream answer suggests it is an extended version of South America, or perhaps a representation of Terra Australis, a hypothetical southern continent that early cartographers included to balance the world map. This is a reasonable explanation, but it does not address the question Piri Reis himself left behind on the map. What were those older source materials he referred to? Where did they come from? And what data did they contain that he could not have gathered himself? When measurement begins to produce uncomfortable results, the anomalies within the Piri Reis map might have remained a footnote in the history of cartography, if not for a systematic re-examination that began in the mid-20th century. Not through intuition or speculation, but through mathematical measurement applied directly to the coastlines on the map. Charles Hapgood, a professor at Keene State College in New Hampshire, led a research team in the 1960s that applied coordinate grid projection analysis to the Piri Reis map and other pre-modern charts. Their method was precise. Identify fixed reference points, apply consistent map projections, and measure the deviation between ancient coastlines and verified modern coordinates. This was not a visual comparison. It was numerical analysis. The results showed that in certain regions, the longitudinal accuracy of the Piri Reis map fell within the acceptable margin of error for 18th century cartography. Not the 16th. Hapgood calculated that the map appeared to use a projection centered near the intersection of the coasts of Africa and South America. Such a choice requires not only geographic knowledge, but an understanding of Earth as a measurable sphere with coordinate systems. Hapgood submitted his findings to the United States Air Force Map Service for independent evaluation. The response came from Lieutenant Colonel Harold Z. Ohlmeyer. In his recorded reply, Ohlmeyer confirmed that the southern landmass on the map corresponded more closely to the subglacial coastline of Antarctica. Not the ice-covered surface seen today, but the bedrock terrain beneath the ice, than to any hypothetical geography available in the 16th century. He noted that this sub-ice topography was only accurately mapped during a 1949 seismic survey conducted by British and Swedish researchers using ice-penetrating techniques. A map drawn more than 4 centuries earlier appeared to depict a coastline that was not confirmed to exist until 1949. Two independent approaches, using different methods, arrived at the same conclusion. The probability that the southern coastline on the Piri Reis map randomly matches the subglacial terrain of Antarctica is considered statistically close to zero. What this analysis cannot answer, and what no analysis since has resolved, is a far more direct question. Where did Piri Reis obtain his source material? Data that should not exist. There is a specific problem embedded within the longitudinal data that the conventional explanation of the Piri Reis map cannot absorb without collapsing under its own weight. Determining longitude is not a matter of astronomical knowledge or observational skill. It is a problem of mechanical precision. To calculate the east to west position of a point on Earth from the open ocean, one must know the exact local time at that position relative to a fixed reference time. Every 4 minutes of time difference corresponds to 1 degree of longitude. Every second of accumulated error, over a voyage lasting weeks at sea, compounds into deviations that can reach tens of kilometers on a map. Before the marine chronometer developed by John Harrison in 1759, the best available method for determining longitude at sea was the lunar distance method. This technique involved measuring the angle between the moon and specific stars to calculate time differences. It worked, but only under ideal observational conditions, with repeated measurements and the use of complex reference tables in real maritime conditions. An error of 2 to 3 degrees of longitude was considered acceptable. At the equator, 2 degrees correspond to roughly 220 kilometers. When researchers applied the same measurement standards used to evaluate 18th century maps to the Piri Reis map, certain sections met those standards. When the same standards were applied to maps created by Piri Reis's contemporaries, those maps failed to meet them. Not because Piri Reis was more skilled than his peers, but because he was copying from a source that possessed a level of precision beyond what any method available in 1513 could produce. There is another map that allows for direct comparison, the Pinkerton World Map, drawn in 1813, 3 centuries after Piri Reis, was built using the most advanced cartographic science available at the time. Antarctica does not appear on that map, not because the cartographer lacked skill, but because in 1813, Antarctica had not yet been discovered, and an accurate map cannot depict what is unknown. The Pinkerton map demonstrates that. Even by 1813, geographic knowledge of Antarctica remained effectively non-existent. And yet, A map drawn 3 centuries earlier appears to contain information about the subglacial coastline of that continent, with a level of precision that science in 1813 had not yet achieved. The data was already there. The question is no longer whether it existed, but where it came from, and through whose hands it passed before reaching Piri Reis. When coincidence is no longer an explanation, the most critical point in this entire case does not lie in any single measurement. It emerges from the cognitive consequence of placing all those measurements side by side. If the Piri Reis map truly inherited precise longitudinal data and subglacial terrain information from older source materials, then those materials must have existed in physical form, nautical charts, numerical tables, or astronomical records, created by individuals who gathered that data directly in the field. This is not something that could result from a single voyage or from theoretical reasoning alone. Measuring longitude accurately across the open ocean requires repeated expeditions, consistent observations across multiple locations, and the ability to synthesize those results into a coherent dataset. That is the work of an organized system, not a single individual or even a single generation. That leads to an unavoidable implication. If the data existed, then the organization that produced it must have existed as well. And that organization has no name in any historical record discovered so far. This is not an argument based on a lack of evidence. It is an argument based on a missing chain of causality. The history of archaeology and ancient navigation does not merely lack evidence for a civilization capable of mapping Antarctica. It lacks any transitional sequence that could connect known cultures to the level of technical capability implied by the data within the Piri Reis map. What destabilizes the entire framework is not the idea of a lost civilization. That idea has existed in many forms for centuries. What makes this different is that the Piri Reis map is not mythology. It is a physical artifact, preserved today at Topkapi Palace, measured and compared against verifiable modern data. The anomalies it contains are not matters of subjective interpretation. They are matters of measurement. And the gap between what the map shows and what known maritime history can explain does not shrink as analytical tools improve. It expands. The archive that should have existed. If the Piri Reis map inherited its most anomalous features from older materials, then those materials must have passed through multiple hands before reaching an Ottoman admiral in 1513. Piri Reis did not work in isolation. He operated within a naval tradition that had access to libraries inherited from the Islamic Golden Age, to Venetian commercial charts, and to the accumulated cartographic knowledge of the Mediterranean world. He was not reconstructing from memory, he was compiling, and compilers left traces. Those traces begin to fade at a specific point. The Library of Alexandria and its successor institutions, particularly the Serapeum, continued to function under Roman and later Byzantine administration until their collections were gradually dispersed during the early medieval period. Scholars who have traced the lineage of Portolan charts, nautical maps that appeared suddenly in 13th century Europe with strikingly accurate Mediterranean coastlines, have identified recurring anomalies suggesting that certain precise geographic data passed through Alexandria before being copied into Arabic cartographic traditions and eventually into European hands. The origin of that data within Alexandria's collection has never been identified. The catalogue of what Alexandria once held was lost along with the materials themselves. What remains is a recurring pattern. Accurate information appears in documents whose authors consistently cite older sources they cannot fully identify. Piri Reis cites maps attributed to Christopher Columbus. The sources used by Columbus include Portuguese nautical charts. Those charts can be traced back to Arab geographers. Arab geographers reference Claudius Ptolemy and sources that Ptolemy himself described as ancient. At each step backward, the chain of custody becomes less certain, and the origin recedes further. No researcher has been able to follow this chain to a document that can be identified as the starting point of the most anomalous data. The chain simply ends. Not in a known archive, not in a dated discovery, but in an absence that the surviving record cannot explain. The United States Air Force Map Service confirmed the anomalies identified in Charles Hapgood's analysis during the 1960s. Since then, no major institutional investigation has been conducted to trace the origin of the source materials used by Piri Reis. The question of source data remains formally open, yet effectively sidelined within academic research. What the map actually says. The Piri Reis map does not prove the existence of a lost civilization. It does something more difficult to dismiss. Through physical measurements compared against verified modern data, it demonstrates that accurate geographic knowledge of coastlines never reached by any known expedition was encoded in a document that existed by 1513, and that the chain of transmission for that knowledge cannot be traced to any identified source in the historical record. This is a precise, limited, and falsifiable claim. It is not mythology. It is not speculation. It is what the measurements indicate, and what the archival record does not contradict. The source materials were either lost, remain undiscovered, were destroyed, or were produced by a civilization that left no other trace that has yet been found. All three possibilities lead to the same conclusion. There is a gap in the history of human knowledge far larger than current history acknowledges. What the map cannot tell us, and what no recovered document has yet revealed, is the true scale of that gap, or how much of that knowledge has been permanently lost. The fragment preserved in Topkapi Palace represents only 1/3 of a map that was itself a copy of older materials. The remaining portions have not been found. The originals have not been found. The civilization, if it existed, has not been found. What has been found is accuracy. And accuracy, in a document this old, pointing to a coastline this remote, is not something that explains itself.